to be brief, even if that is not easy with this complicated global situation and regional perspectives. But well, my background is I was going into Bahrain on February 19 in 2011, and to try to find out what was going on at that time. The context was, of course, the Arab Spring, and I think it was very interesting to see if Arab Spring also could happen in the Arab Peninsula. And I was watching on the YouTube that there was something going on in Bahrain, so I decided to go there. And the photos on my presentation I took, I stayed there until the day before the military went into the Pearl Square and demolished the place. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I would say, though, that I wrote a little piece about it that was published in Open Democracy, where it's free, and I just read it again here before coming today, and I think it summarized some of the events that took place and the background for the conflict. So you can, if you want, afterwards you can go and get it on the internet. And the picture there is a chain. I can't remember how many kilometers, but it was to show what was on the sign here, that Sunni and Shia are united. And this is, of course, a comment to the narrative or the tale that the regime want to tell, that this is a sectarian conflict that was developing, but it's not the case. All right, I got this piece in Open Democracy for Bahrain in the shadow of the Libya war, and this is, I think, a rather important point at that time, and it's still an important point, and that is that when the development took place in March and February 2011, there were not much media attention. All the attention at that time was on the development in Libya. In the first days of, just after February 14, there were some journalists taking a look at the demonstrations and the developments. One reporter from New York Times was shot at by from a military helicopter. But immediately, people, they rushed over to North Africa, and looking at the media at that time, it was astonishing how little attention the development in Bahrain got. I was, walking between the Pearl Square and my hotel room, watching Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, and it was all about some problems in Pakistan and some developments in Libya, and not much about Bahrain. But this was, and I think today it tends to be, pushed away in the media. I don't see much media coverage. But as we already have heard many times today, rightfully, the situation has not gone better. It's gone the other way around. So it deserves much more attention. All right. What kind of state is Bahrain? Yeah, of course, it's a small island outside Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. I call it a ruling state because it's it's owned more or less by a royal family, Khalifa family, around 1,000 members, and they actually owns or have robbed or whatever you want to frame it, but they control the income, they control the soil, they control everything. And then they give some money over to some administration that is called a state, and that is run by a kind of divide and rule mechanism. It is significant that the riot police are not Bahrainis, they are imported from Pakistan, and because they are afraid to use their own citizens for doing these kind of jobs. The population is about 1.2 million. Of course, this is what you can dispute, but around half are Bahrainis, and around the Bahrainis, 64% from the figures that the king is giving us. They could be very different, but says that around 64% are Shia Muslims, and that is the concern for the ruler, that they could be a source for challenging his power. And yeah, this poster is from the square. You can see what they want, and this is the next slide. What is it all about? What was it about? Why did people gather on this square? Why did they every single day make a demonstration through the city center? I think gathering around 50,000 people, maybe more, maybe less. It's very difficult for me to estimate, but enormous, huge crowds of a demonstration going through the city every day. What did they want? They wanted political rights. They wanted the king keeping the promise about changing the system to a constitutional monarchy, meaning that there should be a liberal democracy. They didn't rebel against the king. Even the slogan was "Down, down, Hamad." It was about changing the system, and they felt they had a right to this claim because the king, when they changed the constitution in 2001, actually made a promise that it would go this direction. They wanted economic reforms. As I already mentioned, the wealth of the island is totally in the hands of the ruling family. Of course, they have to be shared much more. They want equal rights to job and housing. It's so that the minority are favorized by the rulers, meaning they have access to better jobs, better salaries, better housing, and so on and so forth, keeping the majority of the population out of these privileges. And of course, they wanted to have equal rights, access to the beaches, to the sea, to the soil, to ownership of all these things that now only are controlled by the ruler. Freedom of speech, liberal rights, human rights, that's what was all about these demonstrations. Also, critic about the corruption. There was the owner of the financial harbor. He got it for $1, and this is a sign of corruption. They were against the forced change of democracy. Actually, one of the demonstrations went out to the immigration office, and why? Because a lot of Sunnis were, so to say, invited or imported as workforce from Syria, from Yemen, or from other parts of the Arab Middle East, and they were immediately given Bahraini citizenship, because then the balance between Sunni and Shia tipped. And this is, of course, when you are a local citizen grown up in Bahrain, you are not having the same rights, and then you see people from Syria coming in, having privileges the first day they arrive in on the island is, of course, a source of anger, and rightfully so. The King's Tale, the ruler, together with his partners in the other GCC countries, the other small Gulf states, and Saudi Arabia, the big brother, is that this is not about political rights and human rights and all these things. It's about Iran that want to mobilize the Shia Muslim in Bahrain and in other parts in the Persian Gulf in order to make a rebellion, in order to extend Iranian influence into the Arab Middle East. They talk, it was actually the former or the late king of Jordan. He invented a frame for that. It's called the Seer Crescent, and the idea or the narrative was that Iran would create a crescent from Iran through Iraq down the peninsula in order to mobilize Shias to squeeze out the rulers of the Sunni kingdoms. And that's why it was very important to have this slogan during the demonstration, and also this chain, because it was a chain that combined the Sunni mosque with the Shia mosque. Just to say, this is, and there were also other signs saying we are not Iranians, we are Bahrainis, or Sunni and Shia are united, and Bahrain is our nation. So this was the slogans to try to challenge the tale of the king. But this was the way it was presented by Saudi Arabia, by the other rulers in the Persian Gulf. This is, orchestrated by Iran in order to extend the Iranian influence. This is, in another way, a tale of the rivalry between the ruler in Saudi Arabia and Iran. The case is, when looking closer into Bahrain, it is not about Iranian influence. Of course, a lot of people in Bahrain have relations to people in Iran, but the demonstrations and the uprising was about political rights that should be supported by the Western world and by the United States, as United States and Denmark and the European Union supported the reform forces in Egypt and other places, but they attempt to do otherwise in Bahrain. The foreign Secretary of State from the United States at that time was Hillary Clinton, and her statement was that, well, we have to analyze the Arab Spring from country to country. And that is another way of saying that in Egypt, it is in the national security interest of the United States to support the reform movement. But in Bahrain, it's different. There, it is in the national security interest of supporting the ruler. And there were some telephone calls from Joe Biden, the deputy or the vice president, and from others to the king in Bahrain saying, oh, don't use violence against the demonstrators. But that was, what is a telephone call? And when Robert Gates, he was the Secretary of Defense, went to have a meeting with the Saudi Arabia king, and they talked for more than 2 hours, and he was asked after the meeting, did you talk about Bahrain? The answer was, no, we didn't. And why is that? I think at that time, the GCC or the Arab Peninsula rulers they were very angry at United States because United States supported the reform movement in Egypt, and they were afraid that they also would do the same in the peninsula. And the United States, they thought they should show, no, this is not the case. You are our allies, and our security depends on your security. So we will have a different approach in the peninsula. And one other reason is, of course, that as we already heard, that the base for the Fifth Fleet of United States is based on Bahrain. It is very important for the U.S. security interest in the Gulf, also vis-a-vis Iran, and also in all the counter-piracy operations that are done in the Arab Sea and this area. Actually, the headquarters for the counter-piracy operations is placed on Bahrain at the American or the U.S. naval base. And that's why also we have seen Denmark having mixed, so to say, interest, because they have been active in this counter-piracy and have therefore relations to the Bahraini rulers in order to being able to conduct counter-piracy operations from Bahrain. Then, as we also heard, there were some negotiations during the late weeks of February with the Crown Prince at the end of the table. And the story went on that, the Crown Prince, he was more moderate and he would be able to negotiate with the demonstrators and so on and so forth. And I don't think this narrative is true, but if we play that it is true, that there could be an interest from the king and the Crown Prince in having negotiations and in having some kind of transition to reforms, then it is absolutely sure that they could not do that because of Saudi Arabia. And at that time, and later in 2011 and in 2012, the message from the capital of Saudi Arabia was that if the rulers in Bahrain started negotiate seriously with the demonstrators in order to have a transition in Bahrain that would make Bahrain into a constitutional monarchy, then Saudi Arabia would simply swallow Bahrain. And this is, the king, he can have an idea about how to do things, but these ideas they have to fully comply with the regime in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia do not want any kind of reform movement taking place in Bahrain. So they ended the demonstration very brutally, as we already have heard. With this support, they call it the Peninsula Shield Force. It should be a military cooperation between the 6 GCC countries and the Arab Peninsula, but actually it was Saudi Arabia with the support of the United Arab Emirates that supported the Bahraini security forces in cracking down on these demonstrations. I'm almost there. We have been there. I think, of course, it's very important, as we already heard, that keeping on reminding our own governments and others that we have a problem here, and it should be in our interest in supporting reform movements also in Bahrain. We, together with Mariam, we organize, and also together with the political party Alternative, a public hearing in Folketinget, or in the Parliament, on May 11, where you are welcome to attend. It would be a public hearing about the situation, not only in Bahrain, but also how the situation in the Persian Gulf influence the other conflicts in the Middle Eastern area, like in Syria and Yemen. So that is one thing that is coming up shortly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. Thank you all the speakers this evening. Thank you, Isabel, thank you, Lars, and thank you, Zainab. Just to wrap up a bit before we have a very short Q&A, because the time is running up. We had a very personal upfront experience being told by Zainab. Isabel has described some disturbing practices used by the government to crack down violently on peaceful protesters and peaceful demonstrations. And we had a sort of helicopter view provided by Lars on socio-economic factors sort of impacting the uprisings and the continued demonstrations in Bahrain. I want to stress the fact that people are still demonstrating in Bahrain, and there is a systematic violent crackdown that continues to be applied on demonstrators. So you could argue, and I think I can argue, having worked at Bahrain Center for Human Rights, that things have not improved since 2011. Things have actually gotten worse. You can find out more about Bahrain, what is happening in Bahrain. You can get daily, weekly updates by visiting our website, bahrainrights.org. You can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and you can like, you can share, you can tweet our posts. That is, I think, a very helpful thing you could do just from your desktop. You could, of course, pick up the issue with members of the parliament, with politicians, with officials, with your friends, with your family, just discuss it. And just a reminder that we are taking human rights for granted in Denmark. It is true what Zainab said, that we are enjoying human rights here freely without being cracked down by anyone. So if you think of the universality of human rights, we don't need to think only on the fact that these things are happening somewhere far, far away from us. We have to think that this is something we have to work on. This is something we must do. And in my personal opinion, this is about human decency. So whatever small step you can take to help countries like Bahrain and other countries in the Gulf, or any other country that is experiencing human rights abuse, you're very, very welcome. So because if we have a bit of time, I think it would be perfect to end the event today by allowing the participants to ask you questions for the speakers. So remember, we have Zainab, we have Isabel, and we have Lars. If there's any question from the crowd, I'll be happy to give you the mic. If not, I'm going to start with a question. And the speakers are free to jump in. We kept talking about lobbying with established Western democracies and sort of publicly rebuke countries like Bahrain on their human rights abuse. I would like a few comments on the effectiveness of this strategy, or any other comments that could help us figure out what are the options left for human rights defenders, activists, dissidents, given all the facts we've heard of this evening. So, anyone brave enough to take on the challenge? Yeah. Thank you.
I think what I would say to that is one thing. When we think of colonialism, we all hate colonialism. Everyone hates colonialism. Even people who are from the countries that colonized other countries hate colonialism. But what was the problem with colonialism? It was that the interests of Western governments trumped the lives and dignity and human rights of people in other countries. How is that any different today? This is what I keep asking myself. The interests of the US and the UK in Bahrain, by having bases there, by having military bases there, trump the lives of people that I love, of people that I live with, of everyone in Bahrain who cares about having democracy and human rights. So to me, it's very, there are a lot of the same things going on. There are a lot of the same things that reminds us of those days when our lives meant nothing, when our rights meant nothing, so that some governments could work on their interests and ignore what was happening to us in prison cells and on the streets in Bahrain. No one feels safe in Bahrain at all. Bahrain is a police state. There are checkpoints on all streets. Every day you take the risk just by going out that you would get arrested, that you would get shouted at, that you would get cursed just for being a Shia, for example. Being a protester is even more dangerous. I've been standing there being shot at so many times I can't even count. You start just living in this situation where you know that at any minute you can be taken away, at any minute you can be tortured, at any minute anybody in your family could be beaten, could be hit, children or adults or old people, it doesn't really matter. So I think what needs to change is that people in the West need to tell their governments that your interests are not more important than people's lives. That government interests are not more important than democracy and human rights. And I think that would be my response.
Very nicely put. Thank you. Well, if there's no question, then I think we'll end the event this evening. And I would like to thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank Isabel Bramsen and Lars Erslev Andersen for coming today and speaking. And of course, Zainab al-Khawaja. So thank you and have a good night.